The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Certified mail with the HOA's return address stamped in the corner. And I knew before opening it that my life in Meadowbrook Estates was about to get a whole lot more complicated. I am Graham Richardson, and I had lived in this planned community in Scottsdale, Arizona, for 6 years. The neighborhood was beautiful, filled with Mediterranean-style homes, manicured lawns, and palm trees lining every street. When my wife Sarah and I bought our house here in 2020, we thought we had found paradise. The community pool sparkled, the tennis courts were pristine, and the monthly dues seemed reasonable for what we received. But that was before I started paying attention to the numbers. My background in forensic accounting meant I could not help but notice patterns. It started innocently enough when I volunteered to help with the annual HOA audit last spring. Our treasurer, Patricia Meadows, a sharp-faced woman in her early 50s with severely styled blonde hair, seemed nervous when I offered my services. She assured me everything was handled by a professional firm and that my help was unnecessary. That response alone raised my suspicions. Over the following months, I began attending every board meeting, taking notes, asking questions. The HOA board consisted of 5 members: Patricia as treasurer, Brenda Carmichael as president, Dennis Wu as vice president, Monica Shields as secretary, and Tom Brennan as a general board member. Brenda was the stereotypical HOA president, a 53-year-old woman with short brown hair styled in what I called the speak-to-your-manager cut, designer sunglasses perpetually perched on her head, and an attitude that suggested she believed herself to be the mayor of our small kingdom. The more I dug into the publicly available financial statements, the more the numbers refused to add up. We had 342 homes in Meadowbrook Estates, each paying $215 monthly in HOA fees. That meant roughly $73,000 coming in every month, nearly $880,000 annually. Yet our financial reports showed expenses that seemed inflated and income that appeared understated. In September 2025, I finally compiled enough evidence to present my concerns. I had spreadsheets, highlighted discrepancies, and a list of questions that demanded answers. The board meeting was held in the community center, a building that was supposed to be maintained by our fees but showed signs of neglect. The carpet was worn, the paint was chipping, and the air conditioning barely worked despite the Arizona heat still lingering in the early fall. I stood before the board with my laptop connected to the projector, my hands slightly trembling despite my conviction. About 40 other homeowners sat in the plastic chairs behind me, most of them looking bored or checking their phones. I have concerns about our financial records, I began, pulling up my first slide. According to our statements, we spent $42,000 on landscaping last quarter. However, I contacted Verde Valley Landscaping, the company listed as our vendor, and they have no record of any contract with Meadowbrook Estates, HOA. Brenda's face flushed red immediately. Mr. Richardson, these meetings are not the appropriate venue for wild accusations. Our finances are audited annually by a certified firm. Which firm? I asked calmly. She glanced at Patricia, who shuffled papers nervously. That information is in our records. I reviewed the records available to homeowners. No audit firm is listed. In fact, I cannot find evidence that an independent audit has been conducted in the past 3 years. The room stirred slightly. A few homeowners looked up from their phones. "This is outrageous," Brenda said, standing up from her seat at the long table. "You are wasting everyone's time with conspiracy theories. If you have concerns, you can submit them in writing to the board for review." I did submit them in writing. 3 weeks ago, I received no response. Patricia finally spoke, her voice thin and defensive. We received dozens of inquiries. We address them as time permits. I clicked to my next slide, showing a comparison chart. There are also significant discrepancies in our reserve fund. 2 years ago, we had $312,000 in reserves. Our current statement shows $194,000. That is a decrease of $118,000. Yet there were no major capital improvements, no emergency repairs, and no special assessments to explain where that money went. Those funds were invested, Dennis Wu interjected, speaking for the first time. He was usually quiet at meetings, a middle-aged man who worked in tech and seemed to rubber stamp whatever Brenda wanted. Invested where? In what? Show me the investment statements. That is proprietary information, Brenda snapped. We are not required to disclose every detail of our financial strategy to every homeowner who thinks they know better than the elected board. Actually, according to Arizona Revised Statutes Title 33, Chapter 16, homeowners have the right to inspect HOA financial records, including bank statements, invoices, and contracts. I formally requested these documents 2 weeks ago, and you are legally required to provide them within 10 business days. The room was fully attentive now. Several homeowners were nodding, others whispering to each other. Brenda's expression turned icy. This meeting is adjourned. If you continue to harass this board, Mr. Richardson, we will be forced to take action. What kind of action? I asked, but she was already gathering her papers and walking out, the other board members following like ducklings behind their mother. The meeting dissolved into chaos, with homeowners approaching me, asking questions, expressing their own concerns. One elderly man, Robert Chen, told me his violation fine had been sent to collections even though he had paid it. A young couple mentioned they had been denied access to financial records when they asked about a special assessment. The threads of discontent had been there all along, I realized. I had just pulled them into the light. 3 days later, the certified letter arrived. I opened it standing in my kitchen, Sarah looking over my shoulder. The letter was printed on official HOA letterhead, signed by Brenda Carmichael. Dear Mr. Richardson, it has come to the attention of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA Board of Directors that you are in violation of several community covenants and restrictions. Specifically, your garage door was left open past 10 p.m. on September 14th, violating noise and security provisions. Your front yard landscaping includes non-approved desert plants that violate our aesthetic guidelines, and you have displayed aggressive and disruptive behavior at HOA meetings. The total fine for these violations is $1,500, due within 30 days. Additionally, you are banned from attending HOA meetings for a period of 6 months. Failure to comply will result in a lien being placed on your property. This is insane, Sarah said, her voice rising. Your garage door was open because you were unloading groceries. The plants were here when we bought the house. And aggressive behavior. You asked questions. I reread the letter, my mind racing through the implications. This was retaliation, pure and simple. They were trying to silence me with fines and intimidation. They cannot get away with this, I said quietly. What are you going to do? I am going to fight back. Over the next week, I threw myself into research. I contacted other homeowners, gathering evidence of similar retaliation and questionable financial practices. Robert Chen provided documentation showing his fine had been fabricated. The young couple, Jennifer and Michael Torres, showed me emails where the board had ignored their repeated requests for information. Another homeowner, Linda Kowalski, revealed that she had been fined $3,000 for painting her front door a color that was actually listed as approved in the official guidelines. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report, 47 pages of evidence showing a pattern of financial mismanagement, retaliation against homeowners who asked questions, and violations of Arizona HOA law. Then, I did something that would change everything. I filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Attorney General's office. Arizona had strengthened its HOA oversight laws in recent years, following several high-profile cases of board corruption. The Attorney General's office had a dedicated unit for investigating HOA complaints, particularly those involving financial fraud. I sent my report via certified mail and email, including every piece of documentation I had gathered. I did not expect a quick response. Government agencies move slowly, I knew, but I had underestimated how seriously Arizona was taking HOA fraud. 2 weeks after filing my complaint, I received a call from an investigator named Marcus Chen with the Attorney General's office. He asked if I could meet with him to discuss my allegations in detail. We scheduled a meeting at a coffee shop in downtown Scottsdale, neutral ground away from the prying eyes of my neighborhood. Marcus was a serious man in his late 30s, wearing a suit despite the Arizona heat, carrying a leather briefcase stuffed with documents. We sat in a corner booth, and he pulled out a legal pad and recording device. "Mr. Richardson, I need to record this conversation for our records." "Do you consent?" "Absolutely." He pressed record and stated the date, time, and participants. Then he looked at me directly. "Your complaint raises serious allegations. Before we proceed, I need to know if everything in your report is accurate to the best of your knowledge." "It is." "I can provide source documentation for every claim." "Good. Because we have received 3 other complaints about Meadowbrook Estates HOA in the past 18 months. Yours is the most detailed and comprehensive. It gave us enough probable cause to start an official inquiry." My heart raced. "What does that mean?" "It means we are opening a formal investigation into the financial practices of your HOA board. We will be issuing subpoenas for bank records, contracts, and all financial documentation. We will also be interviewing board members and examining whether there has been embezzlement, fraud, or other criminal activity." The weight of what I had set in motion settled on my shoulders. This was real now. This was not just a neighborhood dispute anymore. "What should I expect?" I asked. "Expect the board to lawyer up. Expect them to potentially retaliate further against you, though that would be incredibly stupid on their part given that we are now watching. Keep documenting everything. If they contact you, fine you, or take any action against you, I need to know immediately." We spent the next 2 hours going through every detail of my report. Marcus asked pointed questions, took extensive notes, and seemed particularly interested in the missing reserve funds and the fabricated vendor invoices. As we were wrapping up, he said something that chilled me. "Mr. Richardson, in my experience, this level of financial discrepancy usually points to one of 2 things, either gross incompetence or deliberate theft. Given the sophistication of the cover-up, I am leaning toward the latter. If I am right, we are not just talking about HOA violations. We are talking about potential felony charges." I drove home in a daze, the reality sinking in. I had thought I was just exposing financial mismanagement. I might have stumbled onto something far more serious. That evening, Sarah and I sat on our back patio watching the sun set over the desert mountains. She held my hand tightly. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Terrified," I admitted, "but also angry. If they have been stealing from us, from everyone in this neighborhood, they need to face consequences." Just promise me you will be careful. These people clearly have no problem breaking rules." I promised, though I wondered if careful was still an option. The next morning, I woke to find my car had been keyed. Long, deliberate scratches ran along both sides, gouging through the paint to bare metal. I immediately called the non-emergency police line and filed a report, then photographed everything and emailed it to Marcus Chen. Within an hour, a Scottsdale police officer arrived to take my statement. Officer Rodriguez was sympathetic but realistic. "You have any security cameras?" she asked. "No, but several neighbors do. I can ask them." "Please do. Without video evidence, there is not much we can do. Could be random vandalism." "It is not random," I said firmly. "This is retaliation from my HOA board." She raised an eyebrow. "That is a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" I explained the situation, mentioning the Attorney General's investigation. She took notes, her expression growing more serious. "I will include this context in my report. If you can get video footage from neighbors, call me directly." She handed me her card. I spent the rest of the morning canvassing neighbors. Mrs. Patterson, 3 houses down, had a camera system that covered part of the street. She was a sweet woman in her 70s who had always been kind to Sarah and me. "Of course you can look at the footage," she said, inviting me inside. "I heard about what you are doing, questioning the board. Good for you. I have always thought something was fishy with them." We reviewed the footage from the previous night. At 2:14 a.m., a figure in dark clothing and a hoodie walked up to my car, looked around, and deliberately keyed both sides before walking away quickly. The person was careful to keep their face turned from the camera, but their build and gait were visible. "Can you email me this clip?" I asked Mrs. Patterson. "Already doing it, dear." I forwarded the video to both Officer Rodriguez and Marcus Chen. The investigator called me within 20 minutes. "This is good evidence of intimidation," he said. "I am going to recommend that local police increase patrols in your area. This also gives us leverage. If we can identify who did this, it could lead to additional charges and potentially flip them to testify against the board." "You think a board member did this?" "Possibly. Or someone they convinced to do it. We will find out." The following week, the board held an emergency meeting that I was legally barred from attending due to their ban. However, Jennifer Torres attended and recorded everything on her phone, which was legal in Arizona as long as one party to the conversation consents. She called me immediately afterward, her voice shaking with anger. "Graham, you need to hear this. They spent 30 minutes trashing you, calling you a troublemaker and a liar. Brenda said you were trying to destroy the community. Then they voted to increase your fine to $5,000 for continued harassment of the board. It was unanimous. They cannot just increase a fine arbitrarily. They did it anyway. They are also threatening to put a lien on your house if you do not pay within 14 days. I felt my blood pressure rising. "Send me that recording, please." That evening, I sat down and wrote a detailed response letter to the board, copying Marcus Chen and my attorney, a man named David Shapiro who specialized in HOA law. David had taken my case after reviewing the situation, convinced that we had grounds for a lawsuit against the board for violation of my civil rights and illegal retaliation. The letter was professional but firm. I would not be paying any fines that were clearly retaliatory and violated my First Amendment rights to petition for redress of grievances. I would not be silenced by intimidation tactics. And I would pursue every legal avenue available to hold the board accountable for their actions. I sent the letter certified mail, return receipt requested, and waited. The response came not from the board, but from their attorney, a man named Gerald Hoffman from a firm that specialized in defending HOAs. His letter was full of legal threats and accusations, claiming I was defaming the board, disrupting the community, and violating multiple covenants. He demanded I cease all harassment immediately or face legal action. David Shapiro laughed when I showed him the letter. "This is boilerplate intimidation," he said. "They are scared, Graham. Really scared. They would not be coming at you this hard if they did not have something to hide." So what do? We file a lawsuit. We sue them for violation of Arizona's HOA statutes, retaliation, violation of your civil rights, and emotional distress. We make this public, and we let the Attorney General's investigation run its course. How long will this take? Months, possibly over a year. But based on what you have shown me, I think we will win. And if the AG finds criminal wrongdoing, that will only strengthen our case. We filed the lawsuit in Maricopa County Superior Court on November 3, 2025. The complaint was detailed and damning, laying out the pattern of financial mismanagement, retaliation, and abuse of power. Within days, a local news station picked up the story. Reporter Hannah Martinez from KPNX Channel 12 called me after seeing the court filing. She wanted to do a story about HOA corruption and thought my case was a perfect example. "We have been investigating HOA issues for months," she told me over the phone. "Your case has everything: missing money, retaliation, a state investigation. Would you be willing to go on camera?" I hesitated, knowing that going public would escalate everything, but I also knew that sunlight was the best disinfectant. "Yes," I said, "I will tell my story." The interview took place in my living room, Sarah sitting beside me for support. Hannah was professional and thorough, asking tough questions and making sure I had documentation for every claim. The segment aired on the evening news 3 days later. "HOA under fire," the headline read. The piece was 6 minutes long, showing our neighborhood, interviewing me and several other homeowners who had complaints, and ending with Hannah attempting to interview Brenda Carmichael, who slammed her door in the reporter's face while yelling, "No comment." The segment went viral locally. Within 24 hours, I was contacted by 3 other news outlets, 2 newspapers, and a radio show. The story was resonating because almost everyone in Arizona had an HOA horror story. I had just provided the evidence to back up what people suspected was happening in communities across the state. The board's response was swift and predictable. They issued a statement through their attorney claiming I was a disgruntled homeowner spreading false information to avoid paying legitimate fines. They insisted their finances were clean and that they welcomed the Attorney General's investigation because it would vindicate them. But cracks were beginning to show. Tom Brennan, the general board member, resigned with no explanation. Dennis Wu stopped attending meetings. Only Brenda and Patricia seemed committed to fighting, and Monica Shields appeared increasingly uncomfortable in the few public appearances she made. In early December, Marcus Chen called with significant news. "We have executed our subpoenas and received the bank records. Graham, this is worse than we thought. We have identified at least $230,000 in questionable transfers over the past 4 years. Money moving from HOA accounts to what appear to be shell companies, then disappearing. We also found evidence of kickbacks from vendors and falsified invoices. Who was behind it? We are still tracing the money, but the transfers were all authorized by 2 signatures, Brenda Carmichael and Patricia Meadows. We are building a case for criminal charges including theft, fraud, and money laundering." Money laundering. When you steal money and then move it through multiple accounts to hide its origin. That is money laundering. If we can prove that, and I believe we can, we are talking about serious federal charges in addition to state crimes. The investigation continued through December and into January 2026. The holidays were tense, with many neighbors avoiding eye contact with me, unsure whether to support me or distance themselves from the controversy. But others were increasingly vocal in their support, including a group of homeowners who formed a committee to recall the entire board and install new leadership. In mid-January, Marcus Chen called again. "We are ready to move forward with criminal charges. Can you come to the Attorney General's office tomorrow? We want you to be present when we announce the indictments." My hands were shaking when I hung up. This was really happening. The press conference was held on January 22, 2026, at the Arizona Attorney General's office in Phoenix. I sat in the front row with Sarah, David Shapiro beside us, as Attorney General Rebecca Morrison stepped to the podium. "Today, we are announcing criminal charges against 2 individuals in connection with the systematic theft and fraud perpetrated against homeowners in the Meadowbrook Estates community in Scottsdale. Brenda Carmichael, age 53, and Patricia Meadows, age 51, have been indicted on multiple counts including theft, fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud." She went on to detail how the 2 women had created fake vendor companies, authorized payments to these companies for services never rendered, and then funneled the money into personal accounts. The total amount stolen was estimated at $247,000 over a 4-year period. These defendants abused their positions of trust to steal from their neighbors, and then attempted to silence a homeowner who had the courage to ask questions and demand accountability. This case sends a clear message that HOA board members are not above the law and will be held accountable for criminal conduct. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. I felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. After the press conference, Marcus pulled me aside. "Arrests will be made within the hour. Brenda and Patricia are being taken into custody now. They will be arraigned this afternoon. Bail will be set and they will likely post it, but they are going to face serious consequences. What happens next? The criminal case moves forward. Given the evidence, I expect they will eventually plead guilty to avoid trial. Your civil lawsuit will proceed separately, and now you have criminal convictions to support your claims. You did the right thing, Graham." That evening, I watched the news coverage with Sarah. Video showed Brenda Carmichael being led from her home in handcuffs, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. Patricia Meadows was shown being processed at the Scottsdale police station, looking defeated and small. I felt no joy in watching it, only a deep sadness that it had come to this. These were people I had seen at community events, chatted with at the pool. They had chosen greed over integrity, and now their lives were destroyed. But I also felt vindicated. I had been right. I had trusted my instincts and my analysis, and I had persevered despite the intimidation and retaliation. Most importantly, I had helped recover money that belonged to my community and exposed a pattern of corruption that could have continued for years. The aftermath unfolded over the following months. Brenda and Patricia both eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for full restitution and prison time. Brenda received 4 years in state prison. Patricia, who cooperated more fully with investigators, received 2 years. Both were ordered to pay back the full amount stolen plus penalties and interest. The HOA held emergency elections in February 2026. A completely new board was elected, including Jennifer Torres as president and Robert Chen as treasurer. One of their first acts was to formally apologize to me and rescind all fines. They also voted to pay my legal fees as compensation for the retaliation I had endured. My civil lawsuit was settled in April 2026 for $75,000, paid by the HOA's insurance company. The settlement included a provision that the HOA would implement new financial controls, including quarterly audits by an independent firm, mandatory financial transparency, and term limits for board members. Dennis Wu and Monica Shields were not charged criminally, as investigators found they had been largely unaware of the scheme, though they faced criticism for their failure to exercise oversight. Tom Brennan had resigned early precisely because he had begun to suspect something was wrong, but lacked the courage to confront it directly. The vandalism of my car was never officially solved, though Marcus Chen told me privately that evidence suggested Patricia's adult son had done it at his mother's urging. He was never charged, but the implication was clear. Life in Meadowbrook Estates slowly returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. The new board was transparent and responsive. Homeowners were more engaged, attending meetings and asking questions. The community had learned a hard lesson about the importance of oversight and accountability. In June 2026, I attended my first board meeting since the ordeal began. The atmosphere was completely different, welcoming, open, transparent. Jennifer Torres gave a financial report that was clear and detailed, answering every question patiently. When she finished, she looked directly at me. "Graham, on behalf of this community, I want to thank you again for your courage in exposing the corruption that was harming all of us. You paid a heavy price for doing the right thing, and we are grateful." The room erupted in applause. I felt Sarah squeeze my hand, tears in her eyes. I stood to speak, my voice catching slightly with emotion. "I just want to say that this community matters to me. My family and I chose to live here, and we want to be part of something good. What happened was a betrayal of trust, but the fact that we came together to fix it shows the strength of this community. We all have a responsibility to stay vigilant, ask questions, and hold our leaders accountable. That is how we prevent this from happening again." More applause followed. As the meeting continued with mundane discussions of pool maintenance and landscaping schedules, I felt a deep sense of peace. The nightmare was over. Justice had been served. And our community was stronger for having confronted and overcome corruption. That summer, I received an unexpected letter from the Arizona Attorney General's office. It was a formal commendation, thanking me for my role in exposing HOA fraud, and noting that my case had led to legislative proposals for even stronger HOA oversight laws. The letter was signed by Rebecca Morrison herself. I framed it and hung it in my home office, not out of pride, but as a reminder. A reminder that ordinary citizens have power when they stand up for what is right. A reminder that systems of accountability only work when people are willing to use them. And a reminder that corruption thrives in darkness but withers in light. Sarah and I often talked about whether we would stay in Meadowbrook Estates or move somewhere without an HOA. In the end, we decided to stay. This was our home. We had fought for it, bled for it, and ultimately helped save it from those who would exploit it. The scars remained, of course. Some neighbors still avoided me, uncomfortable with the conflict I had brought into the open. My car's paint was repaired, but I knew the damage was there underneath. And I occasionally woke in the night, replaying the stress and fear of those months when I stood alone against a corrupt board. But those scars were worth it. Every time I drove through our gates and saw the well-maintained common areas, Every time I reviewed the transparent financial reports now posted online for all homeowners to see, every time I attended a board meeting where questions were welcomed rather than punished, I knew it had been worth it. In October 2026, a local magazine did a follow-up story on the case, profiling me as a HOA whistleblower and examining the broader issue of corruption in community associations. The article mentioned that similar investigations had been launched into other HOAs across Arizona, inspired in part by the Meadowbrook Estates case. Hannah Martinez, the reporter who had first broken the story, called me for a comment. "Do you feel like a hero?" she asked. I thought carefully before answering. "No, I do not feel like a hero. I feel like a homeowner who asked questions and refused to be silenced. That should not be heroic. That should be normal. The fact that it is considered remarkable shows how broken the system was." What advice would you give to other homeowners who suspect corruption in their HOAs? Document everything. Know your rights under state law. Do not be afraid to ask questions, and do not accept non-answers. And if you hit a wall with your board, know that there are state agencies and law enforcement who will listen. You are not powerless, even when they try to make you feel that way. The article ran with my photo, standing in front of my house in Meadowbrook Estates, arms crossed, expression serious. The caption read, "Graham Richardson refused to be silenced by his HOA. His persistence led to criminal charges and systemic reform." As 2026 drew to a close, I reflected on the incredible journey of the past year. It had started with simple questions about numbers that did not add up, and had ended with prison sentences and fundamental change. I had been scared, angry, frustrated, and vindicated. I had learned that systems of power, even small ones like HOA boards, could become corrupt when left unchecked. I had learned that retaliation against whistleblowers was real and could be vicious. And I had learned that perseverance and evidence could overcome even entrenched opposition. The new board under Jennifer's leadership had implemented every reform we had advocated for: independent audits, term limits, open access to financial records, and a clear process for homeowners to raise concerns without fear of retaliation. Meadowbrook Estates became a model for HOA governance, with other communities studying our reforms and implementing similar measures. I occasionally received calls from homeowners in other communities facing similar issues, asking for advice. I always took the time to talk with them, to share what I had learned, to encourage them to stand firm in demanding accountability. Some of those conversations led to investigations in other communities, more corrupt boards being exposed, more stolen money being recovered. One evening in late November, Sarah and I sat on our patio watching another Arizona sunset, the sky painted in brilliant oranges and purples. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. All the stress, the conflict, the vandalism, I considered the question seriously. There were moments during it when I wondered if it was worth it, when I was scared and tired and just wanted it to be over. But now, looking back, no, I do not regret it. I would do it again. Even knowing everything it would cost, even then. Because some things are more important than comfort or avoiding conflict. Integrity matters. Truth matters. And when you see something wrong, really wrong, you have an obligation to stand up and say something, even if it is hard. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "I am proud of you, you know." Even when I was scared for us, I was proud. We sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell over the desert, lights beginning to twinkle in the houses around us. Each of those lights represented a family, a home, people who were now protected by the reforms we had fought for. That thought brought me comfort and purpose. In December, Right before Christmas, I received a handwritten card from Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor who had provided the security footage. Inside, she had written, "Dear Graham, thank you for having the courage to do what needed to be done. My late husband always said that evil triumphs when good people do nothing. You did something, and we are all better for it. Merry Christmas to you and Sarah." I kept that card on my desk, another reminder of why the fight had mattered. The legal system moved slowly, but it moved. Brenda Carmichael began serving her sentence in January 2027 at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Perryville. Patricia Meadows entered her facility in February. Both women lost everything: their homes, their reputations, their freedom. I tried not to take satisfaction in their punishment, but I could not help feeling that justice had been served. The recovered funds were returned to the HOA's accounts and used for long-deferred maintenance projects, resurfacing the tennis courts, renovating the community center, updating the playground equipment. Every improvement was a tangible reminder that accountability had real benefits for the community. As spring 2027 arrived, bringing the brutal Arizona heat that would soon follow, life in Meadowbrook Estates felt genuinely hopeful. The wounds were healing, trust was being rebuilt, and the community was stronger, more engaged, more aware of the importance of participation in governance. I continued my career in forensic accounting, but I also began doing pro bono work for homeowner advocacy groups, teaching people how to read HOA financial statements, what red flags to look for, and how to demand accountability from their boards. It became a passion project, a way to channel what I had learned into helping others. Sarah and I planted a new garden in our backyard that spring, putting down roots literally and figuratively. We were not going anywhere. This was our home, and we had earned our place in it through trial by fire. One afternoon in April, I was working in the garden when Jennifer Torres stopped by. She had turned out to be an excellent HOA president, balancing firmness with fairness, transparency with efficiency. "Graham, I wanted to let you know that we just completed the annual audit. Everything is clean, fully documented, every dollar accounted for. The auditor said our books are the cleanest he has seen in 20 years of reviewing HOA finances." I smiled, wiping dirt from my hands. "That is because of the systems you put in place, Jennifer. You and the board did that. We could not have done it without you forcing the issue in the first place. You paid a price for this community, and we will not forget that." After she left, I stood in my backyard, looking at my home, thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. I had moved to Meadowbrook Estates looking for a peaceful place to build a life. Instead, I had found corruption, confronted it, and helped transform my community in the process. The experience had changed me. I was less naive about human nature, more aware of how power could corrupt even in small domains like neighborhood associations. But I was also more confident in the power of persistence, evidence, and the rule of law to correct injustice. If I had learned anything from the ordeal, it was this: ordinary people have extraordinary power when they refuse to accept wrongdoing as inevitable. The system only works when citizens use it, push it, demand it serve justice rather than protect the powerful. I had been one person asking questions, armed with spreadsheets and stubbornness. That had been enough to bring down a corrupt regime and restore integrity to a community of over 300 families. If one person could do that, imagine what communities could accomplish when they stood together. As the sun set over the Arizona desert that evening, casting long shadows across my garden, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for Sarah's support through the darkest times, for neighbors like Mrs. Patterson and the Torres family who had stood with me, for public servants like Marcus Chen who took their responsibilities seriously, and for a legal system that, despite its flaws, ultimately delivered justice. The envelope that had arrived that Tuesday afternoon, 15 months earlier, had indeed changed my life, but not in the way Brenda Carmichael and Patricia Meadows had intended. Their attempt to silence me had instead launched an investigation that exposed their crimes and led to fundamental reform. They had tried to make me an example of what happens to homeowners who ask too many questions. Instead, I had become an example of what happens when citizens refuse to be intimidated, when they stand up for what is right regardless of the personal cost. The story of Meadowbrook Estates became a cautionary tale about HOA corruption and a hopeful story about civic courage and accountability. It reminded people that democracy is not just about big elections and national politics, but about participating in the small governments that affect daily life, like HOA boards. As I walked back into my house that evening, passing through the door that led from my garden to my kitchen, I glanced at the framed commendation from the Attorney General hanging in my office. Below it, I had placed a printed quote from Edmund Burke: "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." I had done something. It had been hard, scary, and costly, but it had mattered. That was enough. In the years to come, I knew I would tell this story to others, particularly young people trying to understand their role as citizens in a democracy. I would tell them about spreadsheets and subpoenas, about intimidation and investigation, about fear and courage. But most importantly, I would tell them that they have power, that their voices matter, and that standing up for what is right is never a waste of time. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA scandal was over, justice had been served, and life moved on. But the lessons remained, carved into the history of our community and the experience of everyone who had lived through it. We were changed, individually and collectively, made wiser and more vigilant by confronting and overcoming corruption in our own backyard. And that, ultimately, was the real victory. Not just the convictions or the recovered money, but the transformation of a community from passive acceptance to active engagement, from trusting authority to demanding accountability. We had learned that citizenship requires participation, that oversight requires vigilance, and that justice requires courage. The sun had fully set now, and the desert night was cool and clear. Inside my home, Sarah was preparing dinner, and the smell of cooking filled our kitchen. Outside, my neighbors were returning home from work, children were playing in yards. Life was continuing in its ordinary, beautiful way. I had fought for this normalcy, this peace, this community, and I would fight for it again if necessary. Because this was my home, these were my neighbors, and we all deserved leaders who served with integrity rather than exploited their positions for personal gain. The story that began with a suspicious financial statement and a certified letter demanding payment of an unjust fine had ended with prison sentences, community reform, and a restored faith in the power of accountability. It was a story I would carry with me always, a reminder of what one person could accomplish by simply refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. As I sat down to dinner with Sarah that night, I raised my glass in a quiet toast to all the whistleblowers, the questioners, the people who stand up when it would be easier to stay silent. We are the immune system of democracy, fighting infections of corruption wherever they emerge. And as long as we keep fighting, keep questioning, keep demanding better, there is hope for justice, accountability, and communities where people can trust their leaders to do the right thing. The battle for Meadowbrook Estates was won. But the larger fight for honest governance continues everywhere, in every community, requiring eternal vigilance from citizens willing to pay attention, ask questions, and stand firm in defense of integrity. I had been tested and not found wanting. That was my legacy from this experience, and it was enough.